Well, there's two things going on in America, and that is the number of interracial and interethnic uh, marriages is at an all-time high. In other words, about half of all Asians marry someone that's not Asian, and about 40% of Latinos marry someone that's not Latino, and about 15 to 20% blacks do the same. The difference is, though, the offspring of those marriages and the people involved in those marriages have radically changed their affiliation on census and admissions and have now identified themselves as non-white. And they do that for careerist reasons. Just as in the Jim Crow South, if somebody was 1/4 black and they could pass for white, they said they were white. Now, if you're 1/4 black, you try to pass for black because it gives you enormous career advantages. And so that's what's happening. So it's hard to tell. One of the things they keep saying is that the population is now 66% white, but if you would go back to the number of people in those non-white communities who just 10 years ago identified as white and corrected for increased population growth, you would see that it's probably about 75% white. So it's hard to know, but I guess what I'm saying is they have established under Obama, and it's been emphasized under Biden, that it is okay to say things about whites and do things about whites that would not be applicable to any other group. In other words, you can openly say that whites as a collective are neurotic, or they're hung up on standards, or they're workaholics, or they're all of these neurotic blasphemies, but you would never be able to say anything else stereotypically about any other group. And the answer is, well, when you ask them about that, they say, well, these are historically oppressed groups, so therefore they're not capable of being oppressors. And even if they were inclined to do that, they don't have the so-called power to do that. But I think what we're seeing, though, is a growing rebellion among so-called whites, and it's really suicidal what a lot of these militant minorities are doing, because what they're doing is they are making a collective now, not of right-wing Nazi types, but they were making a collective solidarity of people who are Democrats and Jews and from all over the world who have never identified as white, but they have been identified as white by people on campus, by faculty, and they're starting to create a sense of solidarity, number one. And then when you look at the cities and the states that are run by so-called DEI people, if you look at the big cities, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Baltimore, Memphis, they all have black police chiefs, they have people of color that in the city council that run it, and they have black mayors, and yet everybody is leaving. They're suffering an enormous flight, not just of so-called white people, but of everybody. And so it's a very strange thing where everybody says DEI, 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 but they don't want to live under a DEI city council or mayor or state because they feel they're racist and they are not subject to audit. Not that they're any different than the other people as far as their morality or ethics, but they're not subject to audit. And anybody who's not subject to audit and feels exempt will do things that he should not do.
Victor Davis Hanson shines a light on a deeply concerning issue facing American campuses, the emergence of collective solidarity driven by race, and how it's tearing apart the fabric of our society. Here's the truth. What Hanson is describing is not just an isolated problem in academia. It's reflective of a broader cultural decay, where merit and individual achievement are thrown out the window in favor of racial categorization and victimhood. It's a dangerous trend that erodes trust in institutions and fosters resentment across all racial lines. When we stop seeing each other as Americans first, and instead as members of some racial or ethnic group, we undermine the very foundation of unity that built this nation.
What's happening is the people in East Palestine who were poor whites, that type of population, or middle-class whites, they have thrown up their hands, and I think it's been underreported. It's the largest migration in American history, much bigger than the Oklahoma diaspora or the exodus out of the Old South after the Civil War into Arkansas, Oklahoma, that kind of west. It's a huge. California is losing 280,000 people a year to Nevada, to Florida, to Texas, to Wyoming, to Idaho. And so what the so-called white population is doing, it's saying, I'm had it, I'm not going to pay taxes and then be insulted for all these social programs that are poorly run, or the homeless in San Francisco, or the public schools that are dangerous. So I'm just leaving, and I'm going to a red state where things work. And that turns out in many cases that the population in the red states are more white than not. The big thing that the left doesn't want to talk about, of course, is class. Because if you look at the per capita income of various ethnic groups that are not characterized as white, such as Chinese American, Japanese American, Arab American, Pakistani American, Indian American from India, I think 16 of them have higher per capita income than people who identify solely as white. And so there's a big disconnect in one sense. And if you look at other statistics, what's the greatest number of people who have been killed both per capita and in numbers by fentanyl? 100,000 whites. What is the one major group whose longevity has been static or dropped? Whites. What group has a double the per capita suicide rate than blacks and Latinos? Whites. And so what the racial industry does not want to talk about is class, because they're scared about it. But what's interesting about this backlash, there are people who are saying to Latinos, you have about as much in common with the UC professor or the Stanford activist or the anchor woman on PBS, the East Palestine person has with Bill Gates, or the black person in the inner city has with Oprah. And I've never seen that before in America. The left has been so good demagoguing race, but they are paranoid that they're going to lose large segments of the minority communities who are going to vote on issues of class. And if that were to happen, because they have completely lost the white working class, and whites in general are about 65% Republican, they're not going to win elections. And that's why they have to double down on racism, and what we're seeing on the campuses. But one of the subtexts is there is a great fear that people are tired of these people. And the left has not produced, at least in terms of people that are not white, based on their class. It's been very good for DEI apparat, for careerists in the media who claim that they're 1/8 this and 1/10 this, but not for blacks of the inner city or Mexican American people under this administration.
Victor David Hanson is right. What's really happening is that people are beginning to vote based on values, not race. They're seeing that conservative ideas, things like safety, good schools, and economic freedom, actually make their lives better. This is a huge threat to the left, because once people start thinking this way, they won't go back to voting for failed progressive policies. And this panic isn't just about voting. It's about the culture war happening on our college campuses. Hanson talks about how radical leftist protests, especially the ones that are often anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic, are dominating universities. These protests aren't about free speech, they're about shutting down anyone who doesn't agree with them. And it's not just American students. Many of these protest leaders are foreign students on visas. Think about that for a second. People who aren't even from this country are stirring up division on our campuses. This is a wake-up call. If we don't push back, we'll lose an entire generation to radical leftist ideology. Universities are supposed to be places of free thought and debate, but right now, they're becoming echo chambers of progressive ideas, and anyone who dares to disagree is silenced. That's not the America we believe in.
I think we make a mistake about the modern left. It doesn't have a consistent ideology other than the retention and expansion of its power. And they don't really care about hypocrisy because they control the media and the institutions. So they say, you know, if we're hypocritical or paradoxical, the media will take care of that. And it does.
Well, we have an enormous debt, $36 trillion, and the problem with it is that we don't have people that understand the dangers of it. Printing money, enlarging the money supply. Every time we do this, we bring in a theory from the university, modern monetary theory, that says there is no such thing as oversupply of money because the government has a monopoly. All of these bankrupt, jaded ideas. So the danger that I see it is that traditional worries about the money supply, debt, the need for frugality, productivity, they're being excused or they're being rationalized away by our theory class.
Right.
And we don't have enough people that are informed to object.
As the national debt continues to soar, now standing at $36 trillion, Victor Davis Hanson addresses the concerning lack of understanding about the dangers of inflation, oversupply of money, and misguided economic theories. He emphasizes how traditional values of frugality and productivity are being dismissed by academics, pushing bankrupt ideas like modern monetary theory. Throughout the video, he discusses how Democrats shift their principles to suit their agenda, using the court system as a tool when it serves them and attacking it when it doesn't. Hanson also highlights the left's strategy of importing poverty and changing the rules of governance to bring in new constituencies, asserting that they have no consistent ideology beyond the acquisition of power.
Well, we end up either into an autocracy run by one or two people or a radical French revolutionary majority. And notice that the left is always trying to attack the idea of a republic. They're going after the Electoral College without any idea what the founders said about it, that it was necessary to protect rural interests, geographical interests, the integrity of balloting, the power of individual states under federalism. They're going after 170 years of a 9-person court. They're going after bringing in new states without any idea that could be very dangerous unless there were balanced, one conservative, one liberal at the same time.
Yeah.
But what's the rationale for it?
It's
power of the majority without any check. We're the longest republic dash democracy in the world, 233 years of a constitution. And we've never had a major revolution since the Civil War. And we're pretty stable for all our factionalism. And we have an amazing ability if we go to meritocratic, legal, and diverse immigration to bring in talent from all over the world with a promise that anybody can succeed. We have no aristocracy, no birth-determined grandees. That's very rare in history. And so, we champion the middle and the lower classes over the well-born. And we don't use race or religion as criterion for success. Everybody else does. We have no commissar system. At least yet. They're importing poverty because they're afraid that when people are independent and controlling their destinies, they do well and then they can't control them. So that their agenda on the left doesn't appeal to human nature. So they either have to change the rules of government or bring in new constituencies or deceive us about who they are. But they can't just say, I'm a leftist, this is a leftist agenda, you'll like it. No one in their right mind would ever vote for it.
Well, the thing about the Democrats is all leftists. They have no sustained principle other than the acquisition of power to mandate government enforced equality. So at various times, the court should be independent, all-powerful, beyond politics. And that's when they had, as I said, not just justices like Powell and Brennan and Douglas and Warren but they had flipped everybody. It was just kind of known that if you nominated a David Souter, if you're George H.W. Bush, he would flip over to being left wing, and they thought that was wonderful. They called that evolving. And so for them, the court was sacrosanct. When Reagan and Bush, the two Bushes, and Trump then were able to get true traditionalists, then all of a sudden the court was not a useful tool for the progressive project. So then they come in and say, It's okay if you're Chuck Schumer and you're the Senate Minority Leader, you go to the doors of the Supreme Court, you basically threaten them. In their way of thinking, any institution is useful and is sacrosanct as long as it's in our interest, and we will fabricate or use arguments that we have no shame in changing when it ceases to be useful. So before the 2016 election, they used to brag on what they called the blue wall, and you would pick up any Democratic pollster or political analyst. He says, I just don't think the Republicans are ever going to win, because before the voting even starts, you look at the Electoral College and you look at California, Illinois, New York. It's just not going to ever change. And more importantly, with immigration, especially illegal immigration, we have flipped New Mexico, Nevada, probably Georgia. We're working on Texas. And so they love the Electoral College. As a general rule, the left gets hurt when it privileges race and gender, just because you limit the choices that you can bring to the fore. When you look at how the left had power on the court, and you look at past judges, Powell or Brennan or, as I said, Douglas or Warren, they were all very brilliant guys, and they were very smart, and they were white males. And I just don't see them nominating another left-wing distinguished white males, whereas the Republicans, who are not shackled by that, they not only can nominate a Scalia, they can get somebody like Alito, for example, or Gorsuch or Kavanaugh, that are distinguished and come up with some great defenses of constitutional government. I think we make a mistake about the modern left. It doesn't have a consistent ideology other than the retention and expansion of its power. And they don't really care about hypocrisy because they control the media and the institutions. So they say, if we're hypocritical or paradoxical, the media will take care of that. And it does.